Welcome to the Scottish Conservative Friends of BAME podcast. I'm Rami, a member of the board, and I'll be hosting what promises to be a big episode for you today, featuring Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross MP. So Douglas, thank you for taking time out of your no doubt busy schedule to join us for this podcast episode.
No, thank you, Rami. Delighted to take part and looking forward to the questions.
Fantastic, and I'm sure you must have been busy with all the election preparation and everything. So thank you again for taking time out of your day. But just to sort of get into it, I think most people, or many people, held a different political affiliation in your youth than you hold now. Previously, you being a Liberal Democrat. So what attracted you to the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, and why do you think people should join our party today?
Well, I suppose I'd first of all look at it, what attracted me to the Liberal Democrats, and I would have to say not very much. It was more at the time, I still remember it was in 1997, we're having a mock election at school, part of the Speakers Club I was a member of. This was one of the topics we would use to debate in front of other pupils, and we had to pick a party, and I really had no idea at that time. I wasn't really into politics. I enjoyed public speaking, I enjoyed politics, but not the respective parties. And out of all the leaders in 1997, I liked Paddy Ashdown best. I thought he came across quite well. I always go for the underdog, and he was certainly the underdog in that election. So I stood for the Liberal Democrats in the mock election, did really well, won the mock election at school, and thought, well, this must mean I'm a Liberal Democrat. So I joined the party. I helped out in some elections up here in Moray. And the more I looked at their policies, I could see they weren't the same as my views and my values. So I then looked at the other parties. I took some time away. I gave up my membership of the Liberal Democrats and wasn't a member of any party. And then I voted for the Conservatives. Were the first party I voted for when I was old enough to vote, and I really believed they represented my values of smaller government, more power coming to local areas, trusting people to spend their own money better than governments can spend it for them. And I joined the Scottish Conservatives in 2006 and actually got straight into a by-election. We had a big by-election up here in Moray ahead of then the main election in 2007, and just enjoyed the whole team ethos. It was a tough by-election up here. It was hard fought between ourselves and the SNP, ultimately the SNP winning, but it showed me we had a great range of candidates, supporters, activists and volunteers who were willing to come up to this part of Scotland that not many of them had probably ever visited before, to try and help get the Conservative message out there and win as many Conservative votes as possible. So it all started back in 2006 and I haven't looked back since.
I think it's reassuring that the leader of the Scottish Conservatives has a long track record of winning elections dating back to your school. So I think a good question to follow on from that is, what do you think the biggest challenge the Scottish Conservatives face in winning enough seats to form a government in Scotland, and how do you think we as a party and you as a leader can sort of resolve this issue?
Well, just going back to that major election success in Forest Academy in 1997, I remember I got 46 votes and the next closest candidate was in single figures. So if I could have triumphs like that across the country, I'd be delighted. So we've got to aspire to that. And again, as we're all working together, hopefully we can aim high, as we did back in that mock election. But I think, the biggest challenges we face are obviously getting our message out there. There's an issue at the moment that people are understandably so focused on COVID and listening to what both governments are advising on the COVID restrictions, how we can keep ourselves safe, our families safe, and how we can also protect jobs. So I think at the moment there's not as much interest in the election next year and the policies of the different parties, but in some ways that's understandable, but that doesn't stop us as a party developing policies. And it was something I was really proud of in the conference just last week, was, we are attacking the SNP government for their failures because they cannot get away from their record after 13 and a half years of not delivering for Scotland. But we're not just attacking for the sake of it, we're actually bringing forward a positive vision and a positive agenda. And, I said in my speech, it's not negative to be critical. We need that criticism to start improving something. So we are being critical because there are major failings in education, in support for businesses, in terms of promoting our economy. But also, here are some alternatives. Here's what the Scottish Conservatives would do. Here's what I suggested in my first month as leader to revitalise businesses and support jobs. And I think, What people don't want, and what this pandemic has shown, is there are serious issues for each and every one of us to deal with, and they take far more precedence than a constitutional battle that we've been bogged down with here in Scotland for the last 13 and a half years. Since the SNP came to power in 2007, it's all been about independence. When they got their independence referendum and lost, it's still been about independence and having another one. So let's push that negative, divisive argument to one side, and let's focus on our positive vision for Scotland, and a positive vision that can really take the country forward.
Fantastic. And you referenced sort of developing policy in your response there. And I saw a sort of graphic, including polls, you know, from YouGov, etc., by UK in a Changing Europe, and it showed sort of Conservative MPs and Conservative members tend to be more on the right on economic issues than Conservative voters. So how do you think we can bridge the gap between sort of principled Conservative economic policies and a sort of platform which can appeal to sort of moderate centre ground Scottish, the electorate?
Yeah, well, I think we've done that successfully under Ruth's leadership, under Jackson's leadership, and I want to continue doing that, because if we continue to only attract the core Conservative voters, we will not be a serious force in Scottish politics. And we've worked hard, everyone in this party, to present an image to the public that got us into the main opposition position in Scottish politics. We are clearly the second party in Scottish politics at the moment, and I think we can continue to expand on our representation going forward. You know, I don't want to put a limit on my ambitions for this party, but we've done that by being able to articulate a message which can bring our core supporters with us, because they know we are strong in the union, strong in the economy, strong in law and order, strong on a series of issues, but we can also show to people out there in Scotland who, for whatever reason, for many years, in fact many generations, may not have seen the Conservatives as representing them in Scotland. That's now changed, and it's started to change significantly under Ruth's leadership, and I want to continue that under my leadership. And I've said that, and I've been quite open. Sometimes that means adopting policies people don't naturally associate with Conservatives, but they can associate with themselves or their families and see us as a party who wants to improve their lives, their communities, and help them, rather than this SNP government who want to use all the tools, all the powers, all the money to run Scotland, to run it down, to say that they would be far better if we were to separate from the rest of the United Kingdom. That's not a positive way to deal with devolution, to deal with the Scottish Parliament. That's just using it to meet their own ends of separating Scotland from the rest of the United Kingdom.
And you referenced the fact that the SNP have sort of prioritised independence over, you know, basically everything else, you know, for their whole existence, actually. So, you know, that obviously brings the fact that the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party are very passionate about the union. It's in our name. So if you had to convince somebody in 30 seconds to a minute that they should vote, you know, the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, and that also they should support the union, what would you sort of say to them?
Well, just look how we've come together as four nations during this global pandemic. And as the Prime Minister, as I've said, as many people in the Scottish Conservatives and the Conservative and Unionist Party have said, we are far greater as a union working together than we ever could be as any single part working alone. And you only have to look at that in terms of the support. Just the announcements yesterday from the Chancellor, now £10 billion from the UK Treasury coming to support the Scottish Government in their efforts against the global pandemic. 1 million jobs in Scotland protected through the furlough scheme, 80,000 businesses getting support through schemes generated by the UK Government. But it's not just about finance and money and investment. Just look at what the UK together can do in procuring vaccines. The United Kingdom has procured more vaccines than almost any other country in the world. And that's what we can do by working together collectively to deliver those results for the whole of the UK. So that's more than a minute.
I don't know. I didn't actually.
I didn't have a timer on, so I couldn't tell.
I'll let you off with this. So I think when we're trying to sort of defend the union against sort of people who want to sort of tear us apart, there are two ways we can look at it and approach the issue. There's the sort of economic arguments, the fact that we're better together, the Treasury supports us when we're in need, such as in the pandemic, and then there's the sort of cultural and social arguments, the fact that families sort of work you know, in between the borders, and that we've shared a 300-year union and we've tackled many challenges together, and that it's part of our identity. But when we're sort of on the doorstep, if we need to convince somebody that they should, you know, support the union, what do you think is more convincing to them? Do you think that we should prioritise the economic argument or the sort of cultural and social argument?
I think it has to be both. And the economic argument is very clear, just in terms of the support I've outlined there, but also in how the SNP's argument themselves for a separate Scotland has not developed or come on anywhere in the last 6 years. They've still not been able to answer these crucial questions about what it would mean for the Scottish economy, what it would mean for a Scottish currency, what it would mean about a border between England and Scotland. These are all crucial issues that people were asking back in 2014, didn't get an answer then, and still haven't got an answer now. But it is also a hard argument as well, is that actually we can be passionate and patriotic about being Scottish and British. And there's no shame in that. And sadly, the SNP want us to feel shame in that. But I'm not going to. I'm not going to stoop to Ian Blackford's levels that, I jump on Twitter to suggest someone shouldn't be coming up to Scotland to take pictures, even though that wasn't the case. I'm not going to follow Nicola Sturgeon's route in failing to condemn until she was asked and asked and asked about these protesters at the borders telling English people to, in expletive language, leave the country. And that's what I want to move away from. But we can also promote that heart argument to say that, up here in Murray, my grandfather was part of a big family, and some of his family moved to Corby. So, a natural shift for many people in Scotland was to go down to Corby and work in the steelworks. So we've got great bonds in our own family between England and Scotland. Why should we want to break that up? Why should we have to break that up? That's something, as you said, has served this country and the whole UK well for 300 years, and it should and could continue to for many more to come.
Fantastic. And just to move on to the sort of, the topic area that the Scottish Conservative Friends of BAME are kind of focused on, and the ambitions that we have, obviously that me being on the board member as well. So how do you think our party can balance our conservative principles, things like principles such as freedom of speech and treating individual people as individuals rather than as groups, with the ambition to reduce hate crime and have a political cohort which is sort of more representative of the country that we seek to govern?
Yeah, well, obviously, as Conservatives, we're committed to protecting freedom of speech, and we continually raise concerns about the hate crime legislation that the SNP are trying to introduce. We had a members' our opposition day debate was to try and get this scrapped because it is very destructive and damaging legislation. Only this week we've seen Humza Yousaf trying to amend it, but I mean his amendments were so minor in terms of what they would actually change. The real core, the difficulties, the problems that we have with the bill overall remain. But freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom to incite violence or hatred against anyone, particularly minority groups. And hate crimes are, they're motivated by hostility and prejudice, and they have to be penalised appropriately, and also prevented in a tolerant society. So we want to ensure we get that message across, but we can't allow such reckless legislation to be forced upon us by this SNP government. And I think what troubles me most is their unwillingness to listen to reason, to listen to the arguments from the churches, the Law Society, a range of stakeholders who have said they've gone about this in totally the wrong way, and they're actually taking away from what we should be doing to stamp out hatred and all these prejudices. But the way to do it is not this ill thought out and poorly conceived legislation that the SNP seem adamant to force through.
Yeah, and Liam Kerr, as our Shadow Justice Secretary, has obviously done a fantastic job of holding the government to account.
Absolutely.
On the hate crime bill, and should be commended for that as well. And when you see sort of breakdowns of how people vote, particularly ethnic minorities, our party don't tend to do particularly well. So if you could sort of speak, if you could sort of convey an argument to them, what would you sort of say to try to convince them that we as a party, our policies are actually in their interests as both Scots, Brits, and as ethnic minorities?
Well, I've said I want the team I lead into next year's Holyrood elections to reflect Scotland and also to have the policies that reflect Scotland. So I would say, give us another look. Look at how we're developing policies. Look at the work that the Scottish Conservative Friends of BAME are doing, working with me as leader, working with my team, working across the party to ensure that we have the policies to represent the whole of Scotland and the people in the next Scottish Parliament to represent every part of Scotland. And I think that's something that people can look to positively for the future, of what we're going to do with this party and how we're going to get that message across, and crucially for me, have a group of MSPs after May next year that represent and reflect the whole of Scotland.
And just sort of on that note, what role do you see for the Scottish Conservative Friends of BAME in this election coming up in 2021, but also beyond that as well?
Well, I hope you continue to play the key role you're playing in the party, developing policy, working with us on policy, and getting out there and campaigning, spreading the message, the positive vision we have as Scottish Conservatives right across the country. And this election next May is going to be really different. It's going to be like one we've never fought before. It'll be less, knocking doors, having big gatherings and meetings, but that doesn't mean the vital work that we need to do campaigning stops. It continues, just in a different way. And I know members, the board and everyone in Scottish Conservatives Friends of BAME are right behind us in our efforts to increase our representation, to get our message out there. And that means a lot of hard work between now and May next year, but it'll be worth it when we can see our vision for Scotland reflected in what people are looking for from their politicians right across the country.
I think that's a really inspiring message. And just sort of one final point, to raise. If you could say something to members to encourage them, that we've got a good chance in the upcoming election, what would you say to them?
Come on board. Get involved. I am not put off by opinion polls. Yes, they are a snapshot, a reflection of where things are at the moment, but you can go up and down in opinion polls, and ultimately the only one that matters is next May. So let's, as I've said in other speeches, put the defeatism, whether it's over the Union or chances of any other party in Scotland, put that to one side and focus on what we can do as individuals and collectively as a party to bring a positive vision to Scotland after 13 and a half years of an SNP government that only want to look for distraction from their record and division for this country. We can be far better than that.
I think that's a really positive note to end this discussion on. So thank you very much, Douglas Ross, obviously the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, for featuring as a podcast guest on the Scottish Conservative Friends of BAME podcast. You've been a fantastic guest, and we've discussed some very important issues regarding the 2021 Scottish elections, party policy, the Scottish Conservative Friends of BAME, and everything in between. So you've been a great guest, and thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Rami. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and have me back on again if you will. I'm keen to continue this discussion, and it's great to hear your podcast, and I'm delighted to have been on it today. So thank you.
Fantastic. Well, have a nice day, and hopefully I'll speak to you soon.